Hello everyone, it's Dr. Kate, and now we're moving into another type of methodology, one that you may very well be part of, either as someone conducting it or certainly being the recipient of, and that's called evaluation research. The quote here by an evaluator, which says that the type of research we've been talking about so far, the experimental design, the survey methodology in particular, we're looking at, I guess prove is an overstatement, but we're trying to figure out what variables relate to others in order to reject or support an hypothesis. Whereas what we're going to talk about now, evaluation research, is done with the intent and purpose of improving something, maybe within an organization, maybe something related to human behaviors, but again, it is looking to improve. So you might be asking, what is an evaluation? Well, here's a few different definitions, but you can see the similarity is that they all start out with systematic as part of the definition. There is going to be some type of a process that is put into place in order to conduct an evaluation. The first definition, the systematic investigation of the merit, worth, or significance of an object, something. It could be a person, it could be how well some kind of procedure works. It's really very open. The next definition says the systematic assessment of the operation and/or outcomes of a program or policy compared to a set of explicit or implicit standards as a means of contributing to the improvement of the program or policy. I'll talk to you a little bit in this lecture about how I had done this type of an assessment for the Milwaukee County government, which was related to both a program and a policy. And then the third definition, a systematic way to determine the value, quote unquote, of a program components or activity. So the middle definition, I think, is probably the most common as far as doing academic types of program evaluations. However, folks that aren't even necessarily trained in the scientific method that we've been working on certainly can and do conduct various types of evaluations. Now, how good they are, for me, would be a matter of debate. What's the difference between doing a research project and doing an evaluation? You have this as a handout that you can find within the content area of the course, but taking a look here, both have a systematic approach to them, research as well as evaluation. How they differ underneath each is, first of all, that when we're doing research, we are trying to contribute to the body of knowledge in some area, which is the production of generalizable knowledge. Whereas an evaluation is done for a very specific purpose and has a very specific audience. Going down the evaluation line, it is conducted at the request of a company or perhaps funders of a company to see how well things are going. And due to that, there is a judgment and more subjectivity than is, or at least should be the case in the research world. We're looking at things that are happening as they happen. That's what we mean by action setting. If you work for a company and also want to do an evaluation of that company, that's where you would come into conflicts with roles, which is why it's very typical to hire someone from the outside to come in to do evaluations of whatever components you're interested in. Here at our university, there have been consultants brought in to do evaluations of various types of systems, meaning programs or processes, in order to try to figure out where money can be saved, such as probably cutting employees or ways we can save money procedurally, saving steps, which is time. Now, the goal of evaluation is to have an internal document that would be distributed to a company. It's not typically the case that you're going to publish or intend to do the research in order to publish your results. In fact, usually what you find is for the use of whoever hired you only. That might be part of the contract. What I mean by multiple allegiances is the evaluator has allegiance to, let's say they're from an outside firm, for their firm, as also could be seen as you have allegiances to whoever is hiring you. So they're kind of straddling things in that regard, which may make it uncomfortable depending on how the evaluation turns out. Now going to the left-hand side with research, we talked about the production of generalizable knowledge, advancing a field, that we are creating the questions as far as the researchers themselves, rather than whoever's funding the research giving you those questions. We are using the scientific method, which would mean that we are following a relatively objective process. In the research world, we'll tend to put controls as much as we can in place, which is the opposite of what's happening when you're studying what is occurring at any point in time in a given organization. The role of a researcher is much more defined. One of our goals as researchers is to share our knowledge, our results with others, and ultimately get it published in an academic journal. And our allegiance is to our discipline, not to someone else. Now, we stated up front that the goal of an evaluation is somehow to make an impact to improve a program. But you can make all of the suggestions you want, but unless they're used, it's really wasted, which is what we mean by no evaluation is good unless the findings are used to make a difference. And I've been part of evaluations in my past that have really been for nothing because they were discarded. So what can we evaluate? We can evaluate pretty much whatever you think might be an important thing to assess. It could be, types of advertising efforts that were made and what were the outcomes of those efforts. It could evaluate some, say, community health education program, how it was created, how it was distributed, and what were the outcomes of it. Various research initiatives could also be evaluated. You might have been part of workshops or seminars already in your lives where you might see at the table you're sitting at a brief evaluation form. Everything I do on our campus of that nature is evaluated. Either I am a participant or I'm the one running a workshop or seminar, and data is collected. It might be pretty simplistic, like maybe only 5 questions and room to write some open-ended comments. But still records are kept to see how valuable it was. You could evaluate the outcome of various recruitment programs that were put forth, maybe recruitment for volunteers, maybe other types of recruitment activities you could think of. And you see other examples here. Certainly training programs like workshops and seminars are almost always evaluated, at least to some extent, with a process, which is typically a survey. Political campaigns during and after are evaluated, scrutinized for strengths and weaknesses. One you probably have had for most of you at some point in your life already is an employee evaluation, which is based on, of course, your performance and how it measures up against some set of criteria. And we could go on, but let's not. Let's just keep going. I just mentioned you could conduct evaluations at different points in time, from just creating the idea itself and putting together a brand new program to making an assessment while it's developing, or once it's become mature program, meaning it's very well established, or once the program's finished, a look back, what happened. So when you are doing your evaluation, as you can see here, the stage of program development is going to determine why you're doing the program evaluation. If it's an after the fact, maybe that would be about amount of money raised, or number of recruits that you were able to bring in, types of recruits, and how successful and or not that effort was based upon, again, a set of criteria. Now we want to evaluate programs for multiple reasons, and I guess 4 categories that cover the majority of these efforts would be to gain insight about why a program works and or doesn't. It could be to make an improvement in something that is ongoing so that you have a better chance of greater success with that program. You could be doing an assessment to determine how well the objectives that you laid out are met, if and how the program benefits a given community or target population, and or what kind of results or evidence can you provide that would be a measure of a program's effectiveness. So if you're taking a look at a campaign, for example, to immunize children, there was a big drop in that because there was a fear that getting vaccines as infants would lead to developing some type of an autism disorder. Well, that was debunked or discredited, yet vaccinations still haven't come up to earlier rates. So maybe by some vaccination program that you put out, campaign type, you could then measure within 6 months or a year later, has the rate changed? Of course, in the positive direction, that more parents are deciding to vaccinate their children in the community that you conducted that campaign. Capacity building means that you're trying to enhance, increase what's available to a given organization. Nonprofit organizations are in great need of capacity building because they only have limited funds available that are, I should say, for sure, kinds of donations, as opposed to figuring out different ways to increase their pool of money that they can use to further their nonprofit's objective and mission. So how do we go about doing a program evaluation? Well, the first thing to do is to get the buy-in, make nice with the stakeholders. Stakeholders are folks that are the key people that you really need to have a good relationship with as an evaluator. You describe what the intent and purpose of the evaluation is to that group. Figure out in the next step how you're going to evaluate. What are the best ways to go about it? Is it doing interviews with one-on-one? Should they be open-ended or semi-structured? You want to bring in groups of people that share some characteristic and talk for an hour with them. Are surveys a way to gather the information? Is direct observation on your part as the evaluator of what's happening part of it? Or, as is likely the case, some combination of a variety of those things. How are you going to get at the information that you need? Then you gather this data, maybe it's survey data, lengthy interviews and or focus group discussions. You're going to spend time analyzing that data. The survey data is relatively fast to analyze versus having hours of transcripts to wade through and pull out information from. You're going to do some kind of a report that provides, here are the results, here are what I, as the evaluator, feel are the conclusions I could draw from the data that I gathered. And finally, what do you think should happen? What are the recommendations that you made? And again, it's easy to make recommendations and it's much more difficult to actually have someone follow through with those recommendations. So when I was hired, while I worked at a place called Public Policy Forum to conduct an evaluation of a program called GAMP, G-A-M-P, and that was an acronym for General Assistance Medical Program. Now, as a brief background, that program was sort of a safety net for people who didn't have health insurance and weren't eligible for state or federal insurance, like a Medicare, Medicaid, or some other kind of program like that. This program had been run and paid for by Milwaukee County, and the question was, should this program remain as it is? Should there be changes? Or should it be eliminated? So I was brought on to take a look at the program, both the finances of the program, as well as the operation of how did people apply for the program? What did they have to do? What were the hoops that people had to jump through in order to be covered? How much manpower did this kind of thing take as far as Milwaukee County employees? How often did people have to reinstate their application? And so on and so on. So after, I would say, 3 months of full-time looking at this program, which involved interviewing key partners, the employers, such as the supervisors and such at Milwaukee County, the county executive, who was Scott Walker, who later became the governor of the state of Wisconsin, and also other outside agencies associated with the General Assistance Medical Program. I interviewed a lot of folks who were the day-to-day type of operations people, meaning that they had to look at all the applications, determine if people should or shouldn't be covered, also look every 6 months, as it turns out, to see if they continue to be eligible for the program, and so on. I did some interviews of clinics that were associated with the program and what their procedures were, and did a little bit of interviewing of folks who had the General Assistance Medical Program, who were already part of it. looked for ways to streamline the process, which one I can recall was to say, why don't we just have people sign up for 1 year instead of doing a 6-month review? Because the data showed that nearly everyone was eligible again. It was kind of like a rubber stamp. So why put employees, manpower through that kind of a process when very little changes as a result of scrutinizing everybody's GAMP applications? So what happened? Everything that I'd recommended was discounted and they just cut the program. So they, long story short, hired me to do the evaluation so that they could turn around and say, see, this is really not worth taxpayer dollars any longer, and just cut it and said they can all go to the state program, which is called Badger Care. So we've got those steps we just talked about. And as is stated, if an evaluation, if the results are not used, then it's not a good evaluation, technically, which I felt with the one I did for Milwaukee County. If whoever you're doing the evaluation for, if that organization isn't in the, I guess, right mindset to actually implement what's being found, then why even have any findings? And if the evaluation isn't well focused and you aren't zooming in or honing in by asking useful questions, by sticking to the point, by making a relevant, thoughtful focus group, for example, then who are you going to appeal to later? So if you never conducted interviews or focus groups with, let's say, key personnel in an organization, why would the board of directors really care about what you found? That's how that relates. There's two philosophies or styles, I guess, that we can look at for evaluations. Formative means that you are studying a process that is ongoing. And the idea is you're trying to collect data, get feedback from those that you think are important so that you can make changes as the program moves forward. Summative, on the other hand, means that a program is complete and then you assess its impact. And then that tends to be kind of a descriptive analysis. So this is what happened, and here's the result of it. And you then, through whatever your measures are going to say how effective or not a given program was. So in that first type, the formative evaluation, we're looking at things as they are happening. We're going to say, okay, in order to get, for that Milwaukee County example, an applicant from the start to the finish of the application process, what are the steps that need to be taken? How easy or not are they on the applicant's end of things to be able to complete? And how might that process be altered to make it more streamlined, which is always going to be a big thing because time is money. Can we cut personnel? Can we cut time so that a given employee can process even more of the applications in a given day? And it's also useful that as the process is occurring, the program is in place, that you're giving feedback as it occurs so that the program, as far as its success or not, can be altered. And these kind of relate to each other. Being able to, on the fly, meaning as things are occurring, make alterations or adjustments that all go toward whatever the goal of the program is another reason why formative evaluations can be useful. So what are some examples of formative evaluations? Well, one's called a needs assessment. So if you're asked to do a needs assessment, you are going to delve into a program and figure out, who's the target population for the program, how great is the need for that program, and how might things change in order to better meet that need. So in this insurance example I was giving, because there was a Wisconsin program already in place that possibly could meet the needs of the clientele for the GAMP program, so I was ultimately determined through the needs assessment, or at least partial needs assessment that I did, that closing one program and shifting people over to another larger established program would be the best use of taxpayer dollars. If we go in this formative style, conceptualizing for stakeholders, again, these can be the key funders for a program, a board of directors, could be politicians, it could be people from some given target population that have a big say or intense interest in a given program. How that program is or should be defined or redefined, and who would it reach, and perhaps even it would be altering what are the outcomes that are realistic as a result of that program. You might do a formative evaluation to determine if the program, let's say the content of the program, is being delivered as it's intended. That's what fidelity means, how true to the original intent and purpose a program is. So that might be why you are given, let's say, as far as a training program, all the materials that you should use. Maybe there'd be links to various videos that should also be used during the training process. How you would conduct, let's say, question answer sessions with the trainees, giving you tips and guidelines for that as well. And then assessing how well did that work? What more might be needed? So maybe they determine, oh, we actually need a PowerPoint or a Prezi already pre-designed that all this trainer has to do is walk through that with the people that they're training. So while something is going on, like a training process, you can, as an evaluator, assess what's happening and how we can then improve things. And maybe it would be like building the videos into the program itself rather than having them be links that have to be brought up later, and perhaps that makes it less streamlined and folks might lose interest. Or maybe cut the time of the videos that are shown to exemplify various procedures. Those are the kinds of things you take a look at, and not just for you as the evaluator making all these determinations. You'd probably talk to the group of individuals that were trained and ask them to elaborate on the goods and bads, the strengths and weaknesses of the. So summative, like we talked about, is the after the fact. A program is now up and running and or it's already over with, such as a fundraising campaign. So we're going to look at some kind of outcome measures. These are the dependent variables. What is it we are going to determine means that a program was or wasn't effective? And this can run the gamut. If you're doing a fundraising campaign, obviously one of the major outcomes is how much money did you raise? I was just part of a large fundraiser that has happened every year for a group I'm with called the Optimist Club. And one of the goals, of course, of a major fundraiser is that you're making money, but we have in the past number of years this has been going on particular events like, oh, we'd like to make more than the year before, which is can be kind of a lofty goal depending on what kind of an event it is. And do you have the real capacity to increase how much you make in a given year, which is a story. So in a summative evaluation, if you're asked to do that, you're going to be discussing multiple items such as whatever the objectives of the program was, which you don't set, they probably already were set in the past. They wanted to increase membership in a given organization by 20%. Maybe if it's a nonprofit, they wanted to increase traffic to their website through some campaign by X percentage. So you might be guessing you want to have quantifiable objectives, things that you can measure, that you can tell, did you make it or did you not? How many dollars did you want to raise? Was that successful or was it not? And of course, one of the goals is to not overstate what your goals are because you don't want to fall short. So, were the objectives met? Is there some way that the program needs to be improved or changed, particularly if it's going to be used in future years? What real impact was there after this program occurred? And finally, what other kinds of resources may need to be acquired or redistributed in order for this program's weaknesses to be fixed? So what kinds of summative evaluations might you see? They're typically the ones about if goals that were set for the program in advance were actually achieved. Second is the outcome type, which is to see whether whatever outcomes there were for that program were both things that you can pinpoint, that means demonstrable, and that those demonstrable effects had an impact particularly on what you were trying to achieve, the target outcomes. Other things that are related to summative evaluations are, looking at a bigger picture. What are the overall impacts or so-called effects, which may have been intended and some maybe weren't intended, of that program for a larger audience, like a given community, beyond the organization itself, as well as a cost-benefit type analysis study, which would look at how can we make better use of dollars. And that's often the one used, because the bottom line, the dollars, is obviously important to any organization. What are the 4 standards of an evaluation? The first is utility. Who actually needs this information? What kind of information do they need? This may not be very clear until you talk to the key personnel or stakeholders to figure out how you would proceed with that evaluation. Feasibility is another standard for an evaluation. Can this really get done in a reasonable length of time for a reasonable amount of money and effort? What often happens when an evaluator is brought in is that the company wants way too much and of course don't want to really pay the price of what that would be. So we have to kind of lower the expectations, lower the bar, so to speak. Propriety. This has to do with who owns the information, what is going to be done to ensure that there aren't any ethical boundaries crossed. So is there a confidentiality aspect to it? How can we have the assurance that an evaluator is as free of bias as possible and that questions that are going to be asked are appropriate? Those are the kinds of things that you'd have to be in a contract with a company as the evaluator, making sure that they understand and agree to what steps are going to be taken. And what kind of design? This is again pointing to methodology or mixed methods, really, which is that you might use multiple approaches. You might do some sort of a survey. You might do a lot of observation of what's going on. You might want to do a focus group. What is really needed to get the information in the best forms as well as it being the most feasible way to get things done? And that's accuracy. I did for the United Way what's called the logic model, which is a form of evaluation. This is one example of a logic model broken into its parts. This too is available as a handout that you might want to take a look at if this is a little fuzzy for you. Here they've got it divided into what kinds of things are needed, what are the inputs, and what comes out of it. So who are we investing in? What do we do? Who do we reach? That's the activities and participation under outputs. And then, so what? And that's really the part I was honing in on, that outcomes impact. Short-term versus medium-term versus long-term outcomes for something. So if let's say you want to look at behavioral change, the first step would probably be increasing awareness, increasing knowledge, getting a measure on attitudes, and so on in that short-term column. What comes from a short term to a medium term? Well, it might be that you make a dent in some kind of a behavior change or a practice or a policy or a social action, which would lead to long-term change, even societal change, so civic engagement, economic change. When I was doing that type, the short, medium, long term, and rather than taking it that broad, I'll just give you one quick example. I was doing an evaluation of a food pantry for an organization that is for HIV positive individuals. And one of the social type of programs they had was a food pantry for anyone that had HIV and their families. So short term would be like how many clients and what were their needs. You know, the intermediate, or here it's called medium term, would be things like how could you better serve that clientele? What kinds of steps could it be? Maybe related to hours of operation, maybe of transportation, and so on. And longer term needs would be, can we, with the folks that use that food pantry, can we get them into other kinds of services, such as they had a dental clinic, which I also assessed, as a matter of fact. But that's in I think, more of a micro picture of a short term, medium, and long term. And certainly more of a long term effect as well would be people's health, because better nutrition leads to better health, which leads to better physical outcomes. So if you can see, that's a way that the United Way, which was a big funder of, this is ARCW, AIDS Resource Center of Wisconsin, said, in order to keep receiving our funding, we want you to do these types of logic model evaluation. And that's really all we need to worry about for right now with evaluations.